So for the past 4 or 5 months, Yemen's been going through this protest movement. It's an increasingly dangerous and more unstable situation as the elites compete for power. The start is a broad-based protest movement, youth, civil society groups leading the way, which was then co-opted by the official opposition in Yemen, which in the last two and a half weeks turned especially violent when the regime started fighting against the al-Ahmar family. Last week, President Saleh was injured rather severely in an attack in the presidential mosque. He fled to Saudi Arabia. And now either the situation will go relatively smoothly, where the vice president will assume power and lead a transition, or this could turn very violent, where the president's son and nephews could dig in and decide this is the time to fight to save the regime and to eliminate the opposition once and for all. Well, throughout the protest movement, violence was relatively low. There are a few episodes of pretty severe violence, but the overall number of casualties was relatively small. Early on, people were saying that the violence could get out of hand, right? There are a large number of weapons in the country, and this could spiral out of control. That never happened. Right now, there's a potential for things to really get violent, though, as the regime goes through its sort of last spasms of trying to maintain order and control on the situation. So what we've seen over the last couple of weeks especially is growing protests in the major cities, in Sana'a, in Taiz, in Aden, especially in Taiz. This is really the center of the uprising, of the protest movement. Also, you have a resurgent al-Qaeda organization, which is seeking to exploit the ever-growing undergoverned spaces in Yemen. And as the state's authority recedes, kind of by desertions and defections in the country, but also through officially organized or tolerated chaos, instigated chaos. We see that other Islamists have emerged, especially in South Yemen, and have taken control of some cities. This is not al-Qaeda, though, that's doing this. It's very unlikely that President Saleh will return to Yemen and govern. The injuries that he sustained in the attack last Friday were really very severe. Severe enough to require his evacuation from Yemen to Saudi Arabia. Right away, he underwent at least 2 surgeries. And he's probably much more badly injured than anyone knows. And the Yemeni government continues to maintain that President Saleh will return, and will return as president within days or weeks, but that's increasingly unlikely. And politically, his departure is what was needed to move out of the most recent political crisis. He had to leave in order for the transition to begin, and that still has yet to happen. So while the current political crisis is paralyzing and is deteriorating every day, the economic situation in the country is catastrophic. Yemen's economy is in meltdown. Food prices are skyrocketing, water prices are skyrocketing, cooking gas is skyrocketing. The average Yemeni, who survives on $2 a day, $1 a day, one of the most vulnerable communities in the region, is getting squeezed more and more with less room to spare. And the Yemeni rial is being devalued. It's getting increasingly difficult to get dollars. And Yemen's foreign currency holdings are falling. And very likely whatever government is that comes next will open up the central bank and find that there is nothing left. And there is no money to pay, not only for its current obligations, salaries, subsidies, pensions, but all of the economic concessions that were announced last February. There's no money to pay for any of this. This is the true crisis that we need to be focused on. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the most active and most dangerous of all of the regional franchises, is not going to take over in Yemen. That's not what's going to happen. But the operating space for al-Qaeda is getting bigger and bigger. As the state's authority recedes, the space for al-Qaeda is getting larger for them to plot and plan and mount operations. Since the uprising began, we've seen the regime move its counterterrorism assets away from going after al-Qaeda towards regime protection, towards controlling the protests. We've also seen the regime create instability. They've withdrawn from cities. They've intentionally created a chaotic situation, in large part to demonstrate to the international community, to Saudi Arabia, and to the United States that President Saleh and the current regime are the best thing to hold on to power. They are the only way that you can bring about stability in the country. And al-Qaeda exploits this. As the situation deteriorates in Yemen, as the Yemeni government's attention is focused on other issues, and al-Qaeda seeks to maximize that space, there's also more operational space for unilateral military operations, whether by the United States or by others, and we've seen that. Following the death of Osama bin Laden, there was a drone strike against Anwar al-Awlaki, and there have been several other reported drone strikes since then targeting militants and extremists inside Yemen. Within Yemen, there are several individuals that the United States wants, either to bring back to the United States or to kill or capture, including suspects linked to the Lackawanna 6 case, the attack on the USS Cole, several other cases, and the Yemeni American national, the preacher Anwar al-Awlaki. And al-Awlaki's role in AQAP often probably gets overstated. He's not the head of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, but he is a danger and a threat to the United States and Western interests amongst those groups, those individuals within AQAP that are focused on international targets, not focused on domestic Yemeni issues or focused on Saudi Arabia, but are intent on mounting operations not only against the United States, but against the West. And the big issue with Anwar al-Awlaki is his ability to reach into communities in the West that aren't otherwise subject to the attention of the authorities. His ability to recruit and radicalize people that wouldn't otherwise reach that, get that message. Saudi Arabia is Yemen's biggest foreign aid donor. They bail out the budget every year. They're the only country that provides direct budgetary assistance. And by comparison, we give maybe $300 million in combined military and security and development humanitarian aid. Saudi Arabia gives somewhere between $1.5 to $2 billion. So the scope of the relationship is much, much larger. Saudi Arabia will be affected sooner than any other country by instability in the country. And Saudi Arabia's primary concern with Yemen is stability and security, especially the Saudi nationals affiliated with al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula who are hiding out in the country. They want to see a managed transition with as little instability as possible. And they want to see a government emerge in Yemen that will help ensure their security. And really, the United States and Saudi Arabia want to see nearly the same thing in the country. We want to see a Yemen that is not a danger to itself or its neighbors, and a Yemen that is stable and secure. As the security situation deteriorates in Yemen, and as the government's ability to control the situation recedes, we see that it's affecting American security interests and foreign policy interests, not just in the region, but it's also, Yemen is increasingly a domestic security issue. And we see that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is linked to a number of incidents in the United States, domestic security attacks, as well as attacks in Western Europe, plots in Western Europe. So as the situation worsens in Yemen, it affects things at home in the West. It's not just a far-off foreign policy issue. And the notion of a failed state right next door to the world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, would be catastrophic for the global economy. In order to move ahead in Yemen, to move beyond this political crisis, it's important that the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the European allies impress upon the Yemeni government that President Saleh cannot return. He needs to officially transfer power to the vice president. And we all need to empower the vice president to lead the transition. This will include impressing upon the Yemeni military and security services, led by the president's son and nephews, that they must also step down so we can move into this process. But we also need to send the message to Yemen that the international community is there to support Yemen and help them through this process, financially and politically. And that once our immediate terrorism concern is satisfied, we won't turn our backs on Yemen. Our interests on security are served as all conditions for all Yemenis are improved. We're interested in improving conditions for all Yemenis, kind of full stop, not just working on terrorism and security. But we need to move as quickly as possible through this current crisis so we can deal with the other issues, like governance, like unemployment, like resource depletion, and Yemen's collapsing economy. Yemen is facing this awful confluence of crises: economic collapse, human security, traditional security, a civil war, a secessionist movement, resurgent al-Qaeda organization. All these things going on all at the same time in the state with really the least capacity to manage multiple problems. With the Arab Spring and what happened in Tunisia and Egypt, there's an emergence of a new protest movement that we hadn't seen in Yemen until then. This really drove where we see things now, right? The president agreed he would not run for office. His son would not run for president. No one else in Yemen was able to achieve this level of change. And it was also the biggest threat that the Yemeni government ever faced, as we can see by events now. Unlike any other case, though, with the Arab Spring, Yemen is home, like it or not, to the most dangerous of all of the al-Qaeda regional franchises. So unlike Egypt or Libya or Tunisia or Syria, in Yemen the stakes are much, much higher because of the presence of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which has the intention to strike Western targets, American targets, the capacity, and increasingly the operational space to do so. This current political crisis, it is the biggest obstacle to dealing with the systemic issues that need to be dealt with: the economy, governance deficiencies, resource depletion, unemployment. These are the things that need to get focused on. The sooner we deal with this political crisis and move beyond that, we can focus on the systemic sources of instability in the country. Ultimately, there are no solutions to any of these problems. We can manage them, we can make some improvements, but we won't fix them. But the sooner we're able to focus on those other issues, the better. And focusing exclusively on terrorism is to our detriment. That will make all of the other issues so much worse. So we need to shift our focus away from being solely on terrorism and counterterrorism towards focusing on how do we improve governance, how do we improve access to water, how do we improve the employment situation. These are the issues that we need to focus on.